Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. So it's Sunday, June 11th, 8:30 Eastern Time, where I am in South Carolina in the United States of America. And right now, we have wildfires raging all throughout Canada. And the impact is hitting us here in the United States. And so that's what we're discussing on this episode. Wildfires in Canada, how it's impacting not just Canada, but neighboring areas. What's going on with these wildfires? And how should we think about these wildfires? We shouldn't just think about them as just a Canada issue. They're a much bigger issue than that. They speak to a much bigger issue than just wildfires in Canada. And so how should we be thinking about them? So stay with us. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph. Thank you for listening. So there are wildfires burning all over Canada right now. As of June 11th, 2023, the province of Alberta is saying that they have 77 active wildfires right now all across their province. And Quebec is saying that they have 131 active fires across their jurisdiction as well. 51 of them are out of control and 37 are deemed priority fires. And as of this reporting, 1.8 million acres in this particular area have been affected by these wildfires. And according to the Canadian Wildland Fire Information System, the destruction from these fires up to this point right now is 13 times worse than the 10-year average. And the impact of these fires is not simply in Canada by itself. There are large parts of the United States that are experiencing significantly poor air quality. Places like Washington, D.C. and New York City and Philadelphia, the air quality is really, really bad. And it's so bad right now that they've had to cancel events. They've had to cancel flights. I know our government in Washington, D.C. has canceled a bunch of events because of how bad the conditions are in the air. It is really, really dangerous in this part of the country to breathe in the air that's been produced by these wildfires in Canada. And as of this recording, over 100 million people all across North America are experiencing very poor air quality as a result of these wildfires. And so that's the situation right now as it stands in Canada. They're trying to put out these fires. Our government in the United States has sent additional support, firefighters, resources to help in the effort to deal with these wildfires. It is a really, really big problem. And it's affecting so much more than just Canada. And so it's important to remember that because it's not just an isolated Canadian issue when you think about these wildfires. It's all across the United States, and I'm sure it's going even further north as the smoke continues to travel. I mean, even down here in the South, we've gotten some air advisory warnings that they've highlighted for us to make sure that we stay safe. And so it is not simply an isolated Canadian issue. And so we have to remember that as well. A lot of people are being affected by these wildfires. And so how should we think about it? How should we think about these wildfires as they're happening? So the first thing we have to do is remember that this is not anything new. So wildfires themselves happen every year. In Canada, for instance, they have what they call a wildfire season that goes from May to October every single year. And lots of places around the world have wildfire seasons. I know here in the United States, California on our western coast has a wildfire season. I know in Florida, they have consistent wildfires year after year. And so it is not out of the ordinary to see wildfires happening in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. That's not a problem. The issue is not the presence of wildfires. The issue is the overwhelming number of them and the fact that they're spreading so quickly, particularly in this Canadian instance. So typically you have wildfires in certain parts of the country and they move across slowly. They're easy to hold back and manage so people are safe. and you just allow nature to take its course as the wildfire burns. But in this case, these wildfires spread quickly across the continent, and it's causing a lot of damage and a lot of problems. And so the question is, why is this wildfire season so different than previous ones? And so I think we need to think about this with two primary thoughts in our mind. First, climate change. Since these wildfires took place, a lot of people, a lot of media have been discussing climate change and the impact and the effect that it has on wildfires. And I would agree with them. And the scientists would agree also that climate change is the primary reason why this particular wildfire season in Canada has surpassed every other wildfire season in Canada in the number of wildfires and the damage that it's been causing. So climate change has resulted in increased temperatures. And so when you have increased temperatures, you have drier areas, you have hotter areas, and you have drier, hotter areas for longer periods of time. And when you have this situation, it makes the trees, it makes the brush, it makes all of the leaves much easier to burn, and it makes it much more difficult to contain once they start burning. Because once that fire is ignited, it spreads rapidly through all the dry areas of the country. And so according to the Canada Drought Monitor, all the provinces of Canada are experiencing abnormal dryness and some form of drought. And so that is part of the reason why we're seeing these wildfires spread so quickly. It is dry and it is hot and there's no water. And so once that fire starts, it moves rapidly throughout the area that it's surrounded by. But also, dry, hot weather breeds more lightning. And so wildfires are typically ignited by lightning. Sometimes they're the result of people kind of being careless when they're out in the woods. But in most cases, it's lightning that strikes, that ignites wildfires across a region. Particularly in Canada, they're saying that half of the fires there are started by lightning. And those fires account for 85% of the destruction due to wildfires. And so what scientists are saying is that when you have an increase in temperature, you have an increase in the amount of lightning strikes that you can have. And so the warmer it gets, the more opportunities for wildfires because there's more lightning taking place. And so these instances and this reality makes it very clear that climate change is responsible for this current intense set of wildfires that's moving throughout Canada. There's no other explanation. And I imagine that it's only going to get worse in the years to come as climate change continues to occur and as the world continues to get warmer and warmer and warmer. And so climate change is the primary reason why we are experiencing all that we're experiencing from this Canada wildfire season. Climate change. The second thing we should be thinking about. The first thing is climate change. The second thing is environmental justice. And it doesn't seem to go together, but stay with me because it's really important. So what's interesting about wildfires is that if you look at the research, when it relates to exposure from smoke that comes from wildfires, the research says that the exposure is consistent across race, across class, across income levels, meaning that there isn't a disproportionate exposure to wildfire smoke based on who you are or where you live. And that sounds like good news in a sense, right? So when the wildfires come, we're all being exposed to it, generally in similar ways. Nobody's being more or less exposed to wildfire smoke than someone else. However, wildfire smoke contributes to increased health issues. And what we know from wildfire smoke and any kind of air pollution is that the impacts accumulate. So if you live in a place that's already overburdened, that already has tons of air pollution and tons of contamination around it, when wildfire smoke comes to your neighborhood, it's just another burden that increases the opportunities for you to be burdened with health issues. Things like asthma, respiratory illness, heart disease. All of these things will come not simply as a result of the wildfire smoke, but as a compounding reality that you're being exposed to even more pollution than before. While we might all be experiencing it similarly, if I live in a place where I have generally clean air prior to the wildfire smoke coming, and you live in an area that's not like that, where there's actually lots of pollution already present from other industries, from waste facilities, incinerators, wastewater plants, those kinds of things, you're going to have a compounding reality of more illness, more issues, more concerns, and it's going to be a problem, right? The researchers have shown us that things like emergency room visits, hospitalizations, they all increase in these low-income minority, these environmental justice communities, because they are vulnerable to the wildfire smoke in ways that other communities aren't. Even though we're all equally exposed to the wildfire smoke, there's underlying health disparities and underlying pollution burden that make the wildfire smoke, when it comes, much more damaging to an environmental justice community than to any other community. And so we have to remember that as well. So when we think about smoke coming across the skies and not being able to see in front of us and understanding how damaging it can be for our health, we have to also keep in mind that there are communities that are much more vulnerable to those impacts than others, and communities that need more direct intervention and involvement and assistance than others as a result of that. We can't just treat them all the same as though they're all being equally impacted. They're all equally exposed, but they're not all equally impacted because of the disparities that already exist before that smoke comes. And so we have to keep that in mind. There's climate change that's increasing the amount and the severity of wildfires in general all across the world. But there's also environmental justice considerations that we have to have in our minds, because some people are just more vulnerable than others. Smaller children, older individuals, they're much more vulnerable. People living in certain communities that have pollution already permeating their societies, permeating their neighborhoods, they are more vulnerable and they need that assistance and help. And so when we see big swaths of contaminated air around us, we have to have those communities in mind when we think about ways to intervene and assist, because they're going to need more support and more help than your basic pollution-free neighborhood that's experiencing the smoke for the first time. So we have to think about that. And so what does this all mean for us? For you listening to this podcast right now and trying to think through what's happening. And so there's a few things I want to share with you about that. One, climate change is real and it has real consequences. And researchers and scientists and activists and advocates and community leaders have been saying it for decades. They've been saying we need to deal with climate change because it has real impacts. We need to deal with these rising temperatures, our fossil fuel usage, our pollution, because it has real consequences. Over the last decade or so, we've seen these impacts, right? We've seen high temperatures. We've seen record levels of flooding. We've seen record numbers of heat waves. We've seen record numbers of droughts, Category 5 hurricanes. And now we're seeing record levels of wildfires in Canada. It is not a coincidence. It's climate change, and it has real impacts and real consequences. And second, we have to recognize that natural disasters do not only impact the places where they occur. You know, it's easy to think about this as a Canadian problem, as a Canadian issue, but we can see now that these wildfires are impacting the air quality in the United States. And we're dealing with the fallout from these intense wildfires. And the same is true for any other type of pollution or any other type of natural disaster. So when we emit pollution into the air, when we start burning fossil fuels, we're not just impacting our air and our surroundings, but the air travels and it impacts neighboring countries, neighboring areas as well. And so we have to recognize that these impacts don't just stay local, they travel. It would be foolish to just look at Canada and say, oh, they have an issue with wildfires. I hope they can figure out what to do about it. I hope they get themselves together. They have to figure this out. No, the truth is that we should all be concerned and we should all work together to do something about this, because it's going to impact all of us in the end, not just Canadians. And whatever you think about who's responsible for any particular impact, the truth is when it comes to these natural disasters, when it comes to this pollution and how climate change is accelerating, we all need to come together with solutions and ways to confront these realities. And so, 1, climate change is real. 2, these natural disaster impacts travel. And 3, environmental justice communities have and will continue to experience the impacts of climate change disproportionately. Since these communities are already overburdened with pollution from industries and from stressors related to health and economic inequalities, the residents are vulnerable to all of these climate change impacts. And in the case of wildfires, even though the exposure to the smoke is consistent across race, across ethnicity, across class, because of the underlying issues in these environmental justice communities, they're being disproportionately impacted. There's going to be higher hospitalizations. There'll be greater levels of asthma and respiratory illness. There's going to be more frequent emergency room visits. This is the reality. And it will be the reality for these wildfires as well. And you can look at the maps and you can say, well, these maps show that the smoke is covering all of these areas. We're all being impacted. The truth is, we will see disproportionate numbers of Black, brown, low-income people filling up the hospitals and the urgent care centers and the emergency rooms. And so what should we do about that? What can we do? And so the wildfires are going on right now. So in the short term, you got to check your local air quality index, go online, see what the air quality looks like, see what's happening in your neighborhood, in your city, in your state, in your province. If you can, stay indoors. If you're in a place that's experiencing really low air quality, limit your exposure to the smoke, to the pollutants. Stay inside if you can. Keep your children inside if you can. If you can work from home, work from home. If you need to take time off of work while things are getting better, hopefully, take time from work. If you have to go out there, if you have to go outside, wear an N95 mask. It needs to be N95 because that's the kind of mask that will filter out the particulate matter in this air from these wildfires. A basic surgical mask won't do. A cloth mask won't do. You need a high quality N95 mask. If you don't have one, try to get to a pharmacy, get to a health center, ask for them. They should be giving them out because that's what it's going to take to make sure you're safe from the pollution. This is what we have to do. We have to keep ourselves safe. Keep your family safe. Your parents, your grandparents, your children. Keep them safe. Get masks. Stay inside. If you're able to replace your air filters in your home or in your apartment, wherever you live, do that because that will help deal with the poor air quality around you. And so in the short term, we can do all these things. Now, in the long term, we have a lot of work to do. A whole lot of work to do. We need to build resilience so we can deal with these kind of disasters. We got to get resources to underserved communities. We need to build up local organizations that can supply the materials that we need, supply the masks, supply the filters, the air purifiers, whatever we can find to help people who are vulnerable protect themselves from this heavy air pollution. We have to think about how we can serve the most vulnerable around us. And second, we just have to get serious about climate change. We have to be serious about confronting it. I mean, we really do. It seems like every year we have some unprecedented, some historic event, and we spend about a week, maybe a week and a half, talking about how important it is to deal with climate change. Oh, this climate change is why we're having this massive flood. Climate change is why we're having this set of hurricanes. Climate change is the reason why we're having this heat wave. Climate change is this and climate change is that. And it's all true. But we talk about it for a little bit, we discuss it, and we just move on. And we don't actually do anything about it. We don't have any legislation that deals with it directly. We don't have any local initiatives that actually help communities be resilient in the face of it. We don't have the things that we need to protect people who need protecting. It just all goes away. That can't be the case here. If anything, these wildfires should be a serious wake-up call to everyone. And I mean everybody. Rich and poor, black and white, urban and rural, whoever you are, you should be able to see that these wildfires impact all of us. Nobody is exempt. Nobody can avoid these types of impacts. And so this should wake everybody up and galvanize us to do something about climate change. Do something about our fossil fuel consumption. Do something about how we produce energy. Do something about how we deal with waste and pollution. We need to do something. We can't just sit around and complain and just agree that climate change is happening and then just go about our daily business. We need to see real action, real change. And there's tons of organizations, people out there doing the hard work, highlighting these issues to people who make decisions. Keep doing it. Keep pushing it. And while you're pushing it, make sure you include the reality that there are vulnerable people in the world who are disproportionately impacted by these natural disasters, these changes in temperature, the strange seasons that we're seeing. We need collective, aggressive action to confront climate change. Because if we don't, we're going to see more wildfires like what's going on in Canada. We're going to see more air pollution like we're seeing in the United States right now. And we're going to see a whole host of people who are paying the price for all of this pollution and all of these burdens. You're going to see higher healthcare costs because people are going to the hospital more. You're going to see declines in productivity, declines in education and educational attainment. You're going to see declines in so many things because climate change is ravaging our societies, and we can do something about it. We are contributing to it, and as a result, we have the ability to change the way we do things to confront and mitigate the impacts from climate change. We can do it. We've done it in the past. We've taken aggressive actions previously when we saw things that were really damaging and detrimental to our societies. We need to do it with climate change, and I know we can. We just need to get together, agree, and make it happen. And I know things will get better. I just know it. And that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.